Waiter humiliated by a millionaire customer until the customer's wife arrives and changes everything. Look what happened. Subscribe so you don't miss our exciting stories. The crystal glasses clinked softly against each other as Marcus steadied his hands, carefully arranging them on the crisp white tablecloth. Each placement had to be perfect. This wasn't just any table at the Augustine, this was table 12, reserved exclusively for Jonathan Pierce, one of New York's most notorious venture capitalists, and a regular who demanded nothing less than perfection. Marcus adjusted his bow tie, smoothing down his pristine white shirt. At 28, he'd worked his way up from busboy to senior waiter at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, and he took immense pride in his work. Every evening, he transformed from a struggling actor living in a cramped Brooklyn apartment into a consummate professional, serving the city's elite with grace and dignity. The maitre d', Richard, approached with his characteristic swift stride. "Marcus, Mr. Pierce just pulled up. Remember, he's bringing potential investors tonight. Everything must be perfect," Marcus finished, giving the table one final inspection. "I know, Richard, I've got this." Jonathan Pierce swept into the restaurant like he owned it, which, given his investment portfolio, he probably could have if he wanted to. His tailored Tom Ford suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. Behind him trailed 4 other men in equally expensive attire, their faces grave with the weight of the millions they controlled. Marcus approached with practiced ease, his posture impeccable. "Good evening, Mr. Pierce. Welcome back to the Augustine." Pierce barely glanced at him, gesturing impatiently for the wine list. "The 82 Lafitte Rothschild," he commanded without opening it. "And make it quick. We have business to discuss." Marcus nodded, turning to retrieve the wine. He knew the bottle well, $4,800 of liquid perfection. As he carefully decanted it at the service station, he could hear snippets of conversation about a pending deal worth hundreds of millions. The wine service went flawlessly, each crystal glass filled to precisely the correct level. Marcus stepped back, allowing the men to continue their discussion. But as he turned to check on another table, Pierce's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Wait!" The word was sharp, designed to command attention. Marcus turned back, his expression neutral and professional. Pierce held up his glass, examining it with exaggerated care. "This wine, it's corked." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He checked the wine carefully during decanting. It had been perfect. "Sir, I apologize, but I'm certain—" "Are you suggesting I don't know wine?" Pierce's voice raised slightly, drawing the attention of nearby diners. "I've been collecting wines longer than you've been alive." "Boy, this is clearly corked. Taste it." Marcus knew it wasn't corked. He also knew that sommeliers and servers weren't allowed to taste wines at the Augustine. It was strictly against policy. "Sir, I apologize, but I'm not permitted to—" "I said taste it." Pierce's eyes were cold, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this. "Unless you're admitting you don't know enough about wine to judge?" The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Marcus could feel his face growing hot, even as he maintained his professional demeanor. "Mr. Pierce, I assure you the wine is in perfect condition. However, if you'd prefer, I'd be happy to bring you another bottle." Pierce leaned back in his chair, his smile growing wider. "So you're refusing a direct request from a customer? Is this the kind of service the Augustine is known for? Perhaps I should speak with your manager about your attitude." Marcus stood frozen, caught in an impossible position. He could feel the eyes of other diners on him, hear the whispers starting. His job, his reputation, everything he'd worked for hung in the balance, and Pierce knew it. "Well," Pierce pushed the glass toward him. "Prove me wrong. Taste it." Just then, a woman's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Jonathan, that's enough." Every head at the table turned toward the restaurant's entrance. Standing there, still in her courtroom attire, was Catherine Pierce, one of New York's most respected federal prosecutors. Her expression as she approached the table was thunder barely contained. "Catherine," Pierce started, his smile faltering slightly, "I didn't expect you to join us. We were just discussing—" "Save it," She reached the table, her eyes taking in the scene. The wine glass thrust forward, Marcus's rigid posture, the uncomfortable expressions of the other diners. I could hear you halfway across the restaurant. Are you really trying to humiliate this young man for your own amusement? Again? The word again hung in the air like smoke. Pierce's face darkened. This doesn't concern you, Catherine. This is business. No, this is bullying, and you know it. She turned to Marcus, her expression softening. I apologize for my husband's behavior. The wine is perfectly fine. I can smell it from here. Jonathan just likes to play these little games when he's trying to impress people. Her gaze swept across the table, taking in the other men. Though I can't imagine anyone here is particularly impressed right now. The silence that followed was deafening. Pierce's face had turned an interesting shade of red, while his business associates suddenly found their water glasses fascinating. Catherine picked up the disputed wine glass and took a deliberate sip. Absolutely perfect. As always at the Augustine, she set the glass down and pulled out the chair next to her husband. Now, shall we discuss why you're really all here? I believe it has something to do with the Morton Industries acquisition. Marcus seized the opportunity to step away from the table, his heart pounding. As he retreated to the service station, he could hear Catherine's voice, clear and professional, steering the conversation toward business matters. But his mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened and why he felt this wasn't over yet. In the kitchen, Richard pulled him aside. Everything all right out there? I saw Mrs. Pierce arrive. Marcus nodded, still slightly shaken. She stepped in, defended me, but Mr. Pierce, he looked furious. Richard finished, his expression grave. Be careful, Marcus. Jonathan Pierce isn't the kind of man who likes to lose face, especially in front of his wife, and he has a long memory. Marcus glanced through the kitchen doors at table 12. Catherine Pierce was speaking, commanding the attention of everyone at the table. Her husband sat beside her, his posture rigid, his fingers tapping an irregular rhythm on the tablecloth. There was something in his expression that made Marcus's skin crawl. A cold calculation that suggested this evening's humiliation had been just the opening move in a longer game. Little did Marcus know, as he straightened his bow tie and prepared to return to his duties, that this encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever and expose secrets that some of New York's most powerful people had fought desperately to keep buried. The next week at the Augustine passed in a blur of tension. Marcus found himself jumping at shadows, expecting Jonathan Pierce to appear at any moment. But table 12 remained conspicuously empty night after night. The absence felt more threatening than any confrontation. Still no sign of Mr. Pierce? Richard asked one evening, watching Marcus polish wine glasses with perhaps more vigor than necessary. Nothing. Marcus set down the glass he'd been working on, conscious that he'd nearly polished it into transparency. But his wife made a reservation for tomorrow night. Just her. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Catherine Pierce, dining alone? That's unusual. It was more than unusual. It was unprecedented. In the 3 years Marcus had worked at the Augustine, Catherine Pierce had never dined there without her husband. She arrived exactly at 7 the next evening, elegant as always, in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of another long day in court. Good evening, Mrs. Pierce, Marcus greeted her, maintaining his professional demeanor despite his curiosity. Your usual table? Actually, she smiled warmly, I'd prefer something a bit more private tonight, and please, call me Catherine. Marcus led her to a quiet corner booth, usually reserved for couples seeking discretion. As he handed her the menu, she spoke softly. I think we need to talk, Marcus, about what happened last week and what's about to happen. His hand froze on the leather-bound menu. I'm not sure I understand. Catherine glanced around, ensuring no other diners were within earshot. My husband is planning something that goes far beyond his usual power plays. I've seen the signs before. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Have you noticed anyone following you? Any strange phone calls? Marcus's mind flashed to the black SUV he'd spotted outside his apartment building twice this week, and the hang-up calls that had started 3 days ago. His silence was answer enough. "I thought so." Catherine's expression hardened. "Jonathan doesn't handle humiliation well. He believes image is everything. And what happened here?" She shook her head. "Let's just say, he's not used to being challenged, especially not by me." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Pierce, Catherine, I appreciate your concern, but I'm just a waiter. Surely your husband has more important things to focus on." "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" She opened her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "But then I found these." Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Marcus walking to work, meeting friends for coffee, even entering his acting class. All taken in the past week. But it was the last photo that made his blood run cold. A much older image of a young woman who looked startlingly like him, standing next to a younger Jonathan Pierce. "That's my mother," Marcus whispered, his professional composure cracking. "But how? Why would your husband have a photo of my mother?" Catherine's eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Because, Marcus, your mother didn't just work as a waitress at Jonathan's father's country club 29 years ago. She was also the key witness in a case that was never supposed to see the light of day. A case involving the Pierce family that mysteriously disappeared from the court records." Marcus sank into the chair opposite Catherine. Protocol forgotten. His mother had died when he was just 3 years old. A car accident, he'd been told. He'd grown up with his aunt, who rarely spoke about his mother and never about his father. "I don't understand," he managed finally. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Jonathan's vindictive behavior at dinner wasn't just about the wine. The moment he saw your name tag, he knew exactly who you were. He's been watching you for years, making sure you never got too close to the truth." Catherine leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "Your mother was going to testify about financial irregularities she discovered at the club, irregularities that would have implicated Jonathan's father in a massive fraud scheme. But before she could testify, the accident," Marcus finished, his voice hollow. Catherine nodded grimly. "An accident that was never properly investigated, thanks to the Pierce family's connections. And now, 26 years later, her son happens to work at Jonathan's favorite restaurant. He probably saw it as some cosmic joke until last week, but now he sees it as a threat." Marcus's mind was reeling. The weight of this revelation pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. All these years, he'd believed he was just another anonymous service worker in the vast machinery of New York's luxury dining scene. But he'd been on Jonathan Pierce's radar all along, a potential threat to be monitored and contained. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked finally. "Why now?" Catherine's expression softened. "Because I've spent 20 years married to Jonathan, watching him manipulate and destroy people to protect his family's secrets. I became a prosecutor to fight exactly this kind of corruption, but I could never touch the Pierce family, not without hard evidence." She reached across the table, placing her hand over Marcus's. "Your mother was brave enough to stand up to them once. Now it's our turn." "Our turn?" Marcus echoed. "Yes, because I finally found what your mother was looking for all those years ago. Proof of the Pierce family's crimes. It's all documented, all verifiable, and it goes far beyond what she originally discovered." Catherine's eyes blazed with determination. "But I need your help to bring it all to light." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Richard. "Jonathan Pierce just called. He's coming in tonight. Wants his usual table. Wants you to serve him." Marcus looked up at Catherine, who had already read the message over his shoulder. Her face was grim. "And so it begins," she murmured. "The question is, Marcus, are you ready to face him? Really face him this time?" The dinner service continued around them, the quiet murmur of conversations and the clink of fine china creating a surreal backdrop to this moment of truth. Marcus stared at the photograph of his mother, seeing his own features reflected in her hopeful young face. She had stood up to the Pierces once, alone. He wouldn't have to face them alone, But as he opened his mouth to answer Catherine, the restaurant's front doors swung open. Jonathan Pierce stood there, his expression darkly triumphant as he spotted his wife sitting with Marcus. He began walking toward their table with the confident stride of a man who believed he held all the cards. Marcus had only seconds to decide: run from the confrontation that had been 26 years in the making, or stand his ground and finally uncover the truth about his mother's death. His choice would set in motion events that would shake the foundations of one of New York's most powerful families, and either bring justice long delayed or silence the truth forever. Jonathan Pierce's footsteps echoed across the Augustine's marble floor, each step measured and deliberate. The other diners instinctively lowered their voices, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Marcus stood his ground beside Catherine's table, his mother's photograph still visible between them. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Jonathan's voice dripped with cold amusement. "My wife and my waiter sharing secrets like old friends." His eyes fixed on the photograph, and something dark flickered across his features. "Digging up ancient history, Catherine? I thought we agreed some stories are better left untold." Catherine didn't flinch. "Like the story of how your family destroyed evidence in a federal investigation? Or how about the story of how Claire Thompson's brake lines were cut the night before she was supposed to testify?" Marcus felt his heart stop at his mother's name. The official report had blamed brake failure for the accident, but hearing it stated so bluntly made his blood run cold. "Careful, my dear." Jonathan's smile never reached his eyes. "Wild accusations without proof can be dangerous. Just ask Claire." He turned to Marcus, his expression shifting to one of mock concern. "Did Catherine tell you she's been suspended from the DA's office? Under investigation for misconduct. Such a shame when ambitious prosecutors let personal vendettas cloud their judgment." Catherine's sharp intake of breath told Marcus this was news to her. Jonathan's smile widened as he pressed his advantage. "Oh, you didn't know? The suspension letter was signed this afternoon. Apparently, someone raised concerns about your handling of certain sensitive cases. Your entire career is under review." "You bastard," Catherine whispered. "How many judges did you have to bribe to make that happen?" "Judges? Please." Jonathan pulled out a chair and sat, uninvited. "In this city, all it takes is the right whisper in the right ear. You should know that by now, Catherine. It's how the game is played." He signaled to Richard. "Bring me the Macallan 25 and clear my wife's schedule for the evening. We have much to discuss." Richard hesitated, looking at Marcus, who gave him a slight nod. As the maitre d' hurried away, Jonathan turned his attention back to Marcus. "You look so much like her, you know." Claire had that same self-righteous determination in her eyes, that same naive belief that the truth would somehow protect her. He picked up the photograph, studying it. She was special. Your mother, beautiful, intelligent, and completely unwilling to look the other way when she stumbled upon my father's creative accounting. Marcus found his voice. "You killed her. I didn't do anything," Jonathan corrected smoothly. "I was barely more than a boy myself when Claire had her unfortunate accident. My father, however," he shrugged. "He was a man who believed in protecting his legacy at any cost, a trait I've come to appreciate more with age." "We have proof," Catherine interjected. "Not just of Claire's murder, but everything. The embezzlement, the witness tampering, the offshore accounts, 2 decades of corruption, all documented." Jonathan's laugh was genuine this time. "Do you mean this proof?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive that made Catherine's face go pale. Amazing what a good private investigator can find when he searches a home office thoroughly. Though I must admit, hiding it in a hollowed-out copy of Crime and Punishment was a bit on the nose, don't you think? Catherine's composure cracked for the first time. "How did you get into our house? Darling, I've had keys to your private office for years. Did you really think I wouldn't notice your late-night research sessions? Your secret meetings with Claire's old colleagues?" He pocketed the drive. "I've known about your investigation for months. I just needed to see how far you'd take it." Richard returned with the scotch, setting it down with trembling hands before quickly retreating. Jonathan took a slow sip, savoring both the liquor and the moment. "So here's what's going to happen," he continued, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Catherine, you're going to quietly resign from the DA's office, cite personal reasons, stress, whatever narrative makes you comfortable. You'll agree to a generous divorce settlement that includes a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement." He turned to Marcus. "And you, my boy, will accept a job offer that's coming your way tomorrow. A very prestigious position at a restaurant in Shanghai. All expenses paid, visa arranged, starting immediately. A wonderful career opportunity that will keep you on the other side of the world, well compensated for your discretion." "And if we refuse?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Jonathan's smile turned predatory. "Then I'll be forced to protect my family's legacy with the same dedication my father showed. And this time, there won't be any loose ends left to cause trouble years later." The threat hung in the air, heavy and explicit. But as Marcus looked at the photograph of his mother, something shifted inside him. He thought about her courage, her willingness to stand up to the Pierces even knowing the risks. He thought about the truth she died trying to expose, and how that truth had shaped his entire life without him even knowing it. "No," Marcus said quietly. Jonathan's eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon." "I said no." Marcus's voice grew stronger. "My mother died because she was brave enough to stand up to your family. I won't dishonor her memory by running away." "Think very carefully about what you're doing," Jonathan warned. But Marcus cut him off. "No, Mr. Pierce, you think carefully. That USB drive isn't Catherine's only copy of the evidence, is it, Catherine?" Catherine's eyes widened slightly before she caught herself, but it was enough. Jonathan's confident smile faltered for the first time. "You weren't just investigating," Marcus continued, "the pieces falling into place. You were building a case, a prosecutor as thorough as you would never keep all her evidence in one place. How many copies are there, Catherine? How many people already have the files?" "You're bluffing," Jonathan snapped, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Catherine straightened in her chair, her composure returning. "When I married you, Jonathan, I learned the most important lesson about men like you. You're so convinced of your own cleverness that you never consider someone might be smarter." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Would you like to know who I just texted the complete files to? Or should we wait for tomorrow's news to break?" The color drained from Jonathan's face. "You're lying. If you had proof, you would have used it years ago." "I needed something you couldn't bury," Catherine replied. "Something that would make the evidence impossible to ignore. Tell me, Jonathan, what do you think will happen when the media discovers that the son of one of your father's victims has been working in your favorite restaurant, that you've been monitoring him for years, that your wife, a federal prosecutor, has documentary evidence of both the original crimes and the cover-up? It's going to make quite a story," Marcus added, feeling a surge of his mother's courage, the kind that even the Pierce family can't make disappear. Jonathan's hand tightened around his scotch glass until his knuckles turned white. The carefully constructed world of power and control he'd inherited from his father was unraveling before his eyes. And for the first time in his life, he couldn't see a way to manipulate the situation to his advantage. "One call," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "One call, and I can have both of you." "What? Killed? Like my mother?" Marcus leaned forward. "Go ahead, Mr. Pierce. Show everyone exactly who you are. Add 2 more murders to the evidence Catherine's already distributed. I'm sure that will solve everything." The restaurant had gone completely silent, the other diners openly staring now. Jonathan Pierce, the man who had spent his life cultivating an image of sophisticated power, was visibly sweating in his bespoke suit. "What do you want?" he whispered finally. Catherine and Marcus exchanged a look. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, but both knew that dealing with a cornered Pierce was still dangerous. The next few minutes would determine not just their futures, but whether justice would finally be served for Claire Thompson and all the others the Pierce family had destroyed. As Catherine opened her mouth to present their terms, a new figure appeared at the table, someone whose arrival would change the game yet again, adding a twist that neither Marcus nor Catherine could have anticipated. Jonathan. The voice was aged but commanding, causing Jonathan Pierce to freeze in his chair. "I believe it's time I handled this situation." Marcus looked up to see an elderly man in an impeccably tailored suit, leaning slightly on a polished mahogany cane. Though his hair was silver and his face lined with age, there was no mistaking the piercing blue eyes that matched Jonathan's. William Pierce, the family patriarch, had emerged from his self-imposed seclusion. "Father," Jonathan stammered, half rising from his chair, "I didn't know you were in the city." Clearly, William Pierce's disapproval was palpable. "Sit down, Jonathan. You've done quite enough damage for one evening." He turned to Catherine, his expression softening slightly. "My dear, I believe this belongs to you." From his pocket, he withdrew the USB drive Jonathan had taken from her office. Catherine accepted it with barely concealed surprise. "How did you get it from Jonathan? My son forgets that the security system in your house was installed by my company. I've known about his activities for quite some time." William pulled up a chair, settling himself at the table with the dignity of a man accustomed to commanding attention, including his rather amateur attempts to handle this situation. Jonathan's face flushed red. "Father, I was protecting our families. You were protecting your own pride." William cut him off sharply. "Just as you have been for years, making one mess after another that I've had to clean up quietly." He turned to Marcus, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "You have your mother's strength. Claire was one of the few people who ever stood up to me directly. I respected that about her." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You ordered her killed?" "No." William's response was immediate and firm. "I did not, though I have lived for 26 years knowing who did and carrying that burden." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope, placing it carefully on the table. "These are the original documents your mother discovered, along with evidence of who actually ordered her death. It wasn't my family protecting its legacy, Mr. Thompson. It was someone protecting themselves from what that legacy would reveal." Catherine reached for the envelope with trembling hands. As she began to read, her face went pale. "This is impossible. These signatures, these accounts, lead directly to your father, my dear." William finished quietly. "Senator James Morrison used his position on the banking committee to facilitate our family's financial manipulations for decades. When Claire discovered the connection, she didn't just threaten my empire, she threatened his entire political dynasty. He couldn't allow that." The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. "My father? But why are you telling us this now?" "Because I'm dying," William stated matter-of-factly. "Pancreatic cancer. I have perhaps 3 months left, and I find myself unwilling to take certain secrets to my grave." He looked at Jonathan, who sat in shocked silence. "Your crusade to protect the family name has been misguided, son. Our true legacy isn't in the money or the power. It's in how we choose to use our final opportunities to make things right." Marcus stared at the man who had been at the center of his mother's death, even if indirectly. "Why should we believe anything you say?" "Because, unlike my son, I have nothing left to gain or lose." William withdrew another document from his jacket. "This is a sworn confession detailing everything: the financial crimes, the cover-ups, and most importantly, James Morrison's order to have Claire Thompson eliminated. It's already been filed with 3 separate law firms to be released upon my death or any suspicious accident that might befall any of you." Catherine was still reading through the documents, her legal mind processing the implications. "These banking records, they prove everything. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the bribes. My father orchestrated all of it and took a healthy percentage for himself," William confirmed. "Your investigation was thorough, Catherine, but you were looking in the wrong direction. James Morrison didn't just profit from our family's corruption, he was its architect. My role was simply to provide the legitimate business front for his operations. Jonathan finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell me, Father? All these years, because you weren't ready for the truth, William replied simply. You were too much like James, too concerned with power and appearances. I had hoped Catherine's influence might change that, but instead you let your pride drive away the one person who could have helped you become a better man. He turned back to Marcus. Your mother was an extraordinary woman. She discovered in weeks what federal investigators failed to uncover in years. Her death has weighed on my conscience every day since, not least because I suspected the truth, but chose to remain silent to protect my own interests. Marcus felt tears threatening to fall. She died alone, thinking no one would ever know the truth. No, William corrected gently. She died protecting you. James Morrison made it very clear that if she didn't have an accident, you would. She chose to stay silent to keep you safe. He picked up the photograph that still lay on the table. She deserved better. You both did. The weight of this revelation settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Catherine sat back in her chair, her world visibly shattered by the knowledge of her father's true nature. Jonathan stared at his hands, perhaps seeing for the first time how his actions mirrored those of the man who had actually destroyed Marcus's family. What happens now? Marcus asked finally. William Pierce straightened in his chair, his expression resolute. Now we make it right, all of it. Catherine, you'll be reinstated at the DA's office. I've already spoken to the necessary people. The evidence against your father will be released through proper channels, allowing you to maintain your professional integrity. He turned to his son. Jonathan, you will step down as CEO of Pierce Industries. Your actions in this matter have proven you're not ready for the responsibility. Instead, you'll take a position on our charitable foundation, where perhaps you can learn something about the proper use of power and influence. Finally, he faced Marcus. As for you, Mr. Thompson, I cannot return what was taken from you, but I can ensure that your mother's courage is finally acknowledged. The Claire Thompson Memorial Scholarship will be established at New York University's School of Law, funding education for students dedicated to fighting corporate corruption. Additionally, you'll find that you've inherited a significant portion of your mother's estate, funds that were held in trust all these years, waiting for the truth to emerge. Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed. I don't want your money. It's not my money, William corrected. It's your mother's. The shares she owned in Pierce Industries before her death have been accumulating dividends for 26 years. She wanted you to have options she never had. A chance to pursue your dreams without fear of poverty forcing you to compromise your principles. Catherine reached across the table, taking Marcus's hand. Your mother's final gift to you. A chance to live the life she wanted you to have. The restaurant around them had returned to its normal rhythm, other diners tactfully pretending not to notice the drama unfolding at the corner table. But for those seated there, the world had shifted permanently on its axis. William Pierce stood slowly, leaning on his cane. I'll have my lawyers contact each of you tomorrow with the necessary paperwork. Catherine, I suggest you prepare yourself for the storm that's coming. The Morrison name won't survive this revelation, but perhaps that's for the best. He paused, looking at Marcus one final time. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become. Remember that when all of this becomes public. As William Pierce walked away, leaving them to process everything that had happened, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of peace. The truth about his mother's death hadn't brought her back, but it had finally given meaning to her sacrifice. She hadn't died in vain. She had died protecting him, and now her courage would help protect others through her legacy. But as Marcus looked at Catherine's shell-shocked expression and Jonathan's defeated posture, he realized that this revelation was just the beginning. The real test would be what each of them chose to do with the truth, now that it was finally in the open. 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of the Augustine for the last time. The restaurant's elegant facade hadn't changed, but everything else had. The morning newspapers had chronicled Senator James Morrison's conviction on multiple charges of conspiracy and murder, marking the end of a 3-month trial that had captivated New York. Catherine had been instrumental in building the case, her testimony helping to ensure that justice was finally served. William Pierce hadn't lived to see the verdict. He had passed away 2 months into the trial, but his confession and the evidence he provided had proven crucial. In his final weeks, he had worked tirelessly to make amends, restructuring Pierce Industries and establishing the transparency measures that would prevent future corruption. The bell above the door chimed as Marcus entered the restaurant one last time. Richard was there, organizing menus for the evening service. He looked up with a warm smile. "Are you sure about this?" the maitre d' asked, gesturing to the resignation letter in Marcus's hand. "You know you'll always have a place here." Marcus nodded, feeling surprisingly emotional. "It's time. The theater company offered me the lead role in their new production. Mum's trust fund means I can finally pursue acting without worrying about paying the bills." He paused, looking around the familiar space. "Besides, too many memories here now. Good memories too, I hope." Catherine's voice came from behind him. She looked different now, lighter somehow, despite everything she'd been through. The loss of her family name and fortune had seemed to free something in her, allowing her to become the prosecutor she'd always wanted to be. "The best," Marcus agreed, hugging her. "How's the new office?" "Busy. Turns out there's no shortage of corporate corruption to prosecute," she smiled wryly. "But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to give you something before you left." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a photo he'd never seen before, his mother on stage, in what appeared to be a college production. She was radiant, caught in mid-performance. "Found it in my father's files," Catherine explained softly. "Apparently, she was quite the actress before she had to leave school to support her family. Thought you should have it." Marcus traced his mother's smile with his finger, seeing where his own dreams had come from. "Thank you," he managed. "There's more," Catherine continued. "Jonathan wanted me to give you this." She handed him another envelope, heavier this time. Marcus opened it cautiously. His relationship with Jonathan Pierce remained complicated. After his father's death, Jonathan had undergone a profound change, dedicating himself to reforming Pierce Industries and supporting the charitable foundation. But the weight of the past still hung between them. Inside the envelope was a playbill from a small theater in Queens, dated 29 years ago. Claire Thompson's name was highlighted in the cast list. "It was her last performance," Catherine explained. "Jonathan found it in his father's things. Apparently, William Pierce saw her perform and was so impressed he offered her a job at the country club to help support her acting career. He kept the playbill all these years." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. Each new piece of his mother's life he discovered helped complete the picture of who she had been, not just a victim of corruption, but a vibrant woman with dreams and talents of her own. "And one more thing," Catherine added, pulling out a business card. "The theatre company's board of directors has an opening. Jonathan thought, given your background in both performance and handling difficult personalities." She smiled. "Well, let's just say your name has been put forward." Marcus stared at the card. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. Your mother was younger than you when she uncovered one of the biggest financial frauds in New York history," Catherine reminded him gently. "Sometimes we're ready for more than we think." The restaurant staff had begun arriving for the evening service, the familiar rhythm of preparation playing out around them. Marcus watched them work, remembering his first day here. How proud he'd been to be part of something so elegant and refined. He'd learned so much since then, about power, corruption, justice, and most importantly, about himself. "Life's funny," he said finally. "I spent years working here, serving the powerful and wealthy, thinking I was just a small part of their world. Never imagined I'd end up helping bring down a senator and transform one of New York's biggest companies." "You did more than that," Catherine corrected. You helped restore justice to your mother's memory. The Claire Thompson Memorial Scholarship has already funded 10 law students who'll carry on her fight against corruption. Her story is inspiring a whole new generation. Marcus nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. Finally, he found his voice. I used to think success meant making it big, seeing my name in lights. Now I know it's about making a difference, just like she did. Speaking of making a difference, Catherine smiled. I hear Jonathan's attending your opening night next month. Front row. Marcus couldn't help but laugh at the irony. From trying to humiliate the waiter to supporting the actor, people really can change. Some people, Catherine agreed, when they're brave enough to face the truth about themselves. She checked her watch. I should get back to the office. Will you be okay? Marcus looked around the Augustine one last time, remembering everything that had happened here, the humiliation that had started it all, the revelations that had changed everything, and the justice that had finally been served. Yeah, he said softly, I really will. After Catherine left, Marcus placed his resignation letter on Richard's desk. As he walked out of the Augustine for the last time, he paused to look up at the elegant facade. 6 months ago, he'd been just another waiter, trying to survive in a city of power and wealth. Now he was stepping into a new chapter of his life, carrying his mother's legacy forward in ways she might never have imagined. He touched the photograph in his pocket. His mother on stage, living her dream before life forced her to take a different path. Tomorrow, he would begin rehearsals for his first leading role. But more importantly, he would take his place on the theatre's board, using his voice to help other artists pursue their dreams. As he walked away from the Augustine, Marcus Thompson smiled. His mother had died protecting him, ensuring he would have the chance to live freely and follow his dreams. The best way to honor her sacrifice was to make those dreams count for something more than just personal success. The morning sun caught the buildings of Manhattan, making them shine like beacons of possibility. Somewhere in the city, Catherine was building cases against corrupt executives. At Pierce Industries, Jonathan was learning to use his power for positive change. And here, on a quiet street in New York, Claire Thompson's son was finally stepping into the life she had always wanted for him, one where truth, justice, and the courage to stand up for what's right mattered more than power or pride. Let's talk about this powerful story of justice, redemption, and standing up for what's right. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have had the courage to stand up against someone as powerful as Jonathan Pierce? Do you think Catherine made the right choice in betraying her own father to expose the truth? How far would you go to fight for justice? And what about William Pierce's redemption at the end? Do you believe people can truly change when faced with their mortality? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss how money and power can corrupt and what it takes to stay true to our principles. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video, where we'll explore another gripping tale of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Remember, your voice matters. Join the conversation below and let us know what you thought about this story of justice served.